Hello, welcome back. I've got another devlog. Today's going to be focused on kind of my week of transitioning from my spaghetti code player controller to using a hierarchical finite state machine for my player controller. It was quite the 8 days. It felt very exciting at first and then very kind of scary, not scary, but I got really kind of nervous that things weren't going to work out well, and then very discouraging as I still had issues and I wasn't sure what was going on. And but now finally in a good state. It was a really good learning experience, and I've got a few tips or a few pitfalls to maybe avoid. So I guess I'll step back a bit and take a look at my states. So I followed a video and guide from Mina, who she did a great video, a couple of videos on a finite state machine and then a hierarchical state machine. Her implementation is a bit different from what I've seen of other implementations in the sense that the super states are not actually instantiated. So if you go in and you take a look at the states she has like a grounded state. But in the state machine, you never instantiate grounded. You would only instantiate the children, the states they inherit from grounded. I've seen other videos where they actually instantiate the parent state and the substate, and you could keep going. You could have substates of substates. It could go as far as you want. Obviously, it would get very complicated at that point, and it would be like, why are you doing this? A state machine to begin with. But I went with this because it seemed like it would get the job done for what I needed. And so it'd be simpler and it would still achieve what I need to get done. And I still think that's true for the most part. I may eventually try the other kind of where you actually instantiate the super and the substates, the child states. But for now, this is working. And I may do some restructuring. But basically, the benefit of this is, well, one, just using a state machine, period. The benefit is now my code is encapsulated, it's separated. So when I have code that is affecting my wall jumping, I know that code is either directly in the wall jumping class or in the in-air class. So, or, maybe I'm going to check the transitions to that state. Like, it's very clear what to check. And if I want to modify my wall jump, I can go do that without being worried that I'm going to go mess up something else. Because that's what was going on with my spaghetti code, was that, I just had so many, conditionals and things, checking bools and all this stuff all over. And I knew that, I was coming back to Unity after a long time off, and I was relearning, and I knew, hey, I just want to see if I can get something working, if I can get the player to feel good, and once I do, then I can refactor it. And so that's what I started to do. And like I was saying before, is that I was running into some issues when I got it all up and running, and it really discouraged me. Like, I felt really bummed because I had spent so much time, and I thought, this is going to fix everything, and it didn't seem to. But luckily, seems like all those issues were my fault, which is good, and I eventually figured it out. So the main issue I was having was sometimes it seemed like the game would eat my input sometimes, or it would transition, like just weird things would happen. So one of the easier ones to reproduce was if I was idle and I pressed jump, and left or right at the same time, I would not jump. I was holding jump, but I wouldn't do my full jump. I would just do a short little hop and go back down like that. So after debugging for a bit, I realized what was happening was that I was going from the idle state, and I was going to the jumping state, and then I was going to the moving state. You should only be able to do if you're grounded. Or that's not true. You can transition to the moving state from many states, but jumping state is not a state that can transition to the moving state with how I have it set up. And then I would transition to the falling state, which, the jumping state is transitioning to the falling state. So something weird was going on, and I couldn't figure it out for a while. And luckily, I figured it out, and it was a misunderstanding on my part. So something to consider if you're implementing a finite state machine, or really if you're ever overriding any method. Some of you maybe, this is probably common sense to a lot of people, but for me, I guess I misunderstood this. For some reason, I was thinking that if I called the base, and if I returned in the base, it would return in the override as well. But that does not happen, obviously, or not obviously. It just returns like this would return, So if this was a bool, it's a void, but if it was a bool, then, I could return some Boolean. So for some reason I thought, since, it's an override, I thought it was different from just any other method. I thought since, it's the base, if I return in the base, it's the same method, so it would return for the entire thing. But that's not the case. So basically what this check change state is this actually checking my, for state changes from the idle state. And I do a couple of checks. I do this check to go into the moving state. But then it's grabbing these checks, it's overriding these from the grounded state. And basically, the kind of paradigm I'm following is that if you are in a state, that state will need to check for itself for state changes that are within the same parent state. So moving checks to go to idle, idle checks to go to moving. But if we're leaving grounded, then these states ought to share those transitions, basically. So, for example, going to jumping is this, moving and idle both go to jumping, and they have the same condition for going to jumping, which is you are on the ground, which you're in grounded state, and you press the jump button. So that's why, it just helps to reduce rewriting some of the code, because both moving and idle use all three of these checks for changing transitions. So, and you can see I put these returns here so that, like I thought, when, the override calls this, it would return, but it does not. So, easy fix. Simply put those checks after. Because now, when this runs, if this condition is true, it will return. So these will not run. So that's what was happening, was that since I was running these first from grounded, it was going through, I was pressing move and jump at the same time. It would go, okay, great. We're going to change states to jumping. It would change my state, but the code, the method finishes executing. So even though I've changed states to jumping, it would then come over here and it would finish running. And since this was above here, it would then kick out of here. This went to jumping, and then it would run this and it would see, okay, is the X velocity greater than 0.06? Yes, now move to the moving state. So I would move out of the jumping state to the moving state, and that was messing things up. So simply putting this under here fixes this. I guess I could also make it so that instead of a void, this returns, something else like a bool or something, and then I could check for, hey, if this is true, it did change states, so don't run anything else after it. There's various ways you could solve it, but since I already had this all done, just moving it to the bottom was enough to fix that. And now if I save that, and when I rerun, I'm unable to reproduce that issue. So that was the main hiccup. The other one I had was in my dashing state. I was, here we go. I have this check for a timer, and this timer is used to determine how long the player should be in the dashing state. I have this dash duration timer and a dash duration. So the timer compares, and basically as long as the dash, the timer is less than the duration, increment the timer, and once it's over, then do something else. Basically stop dashing and return to like going into falling. So, before I had this timer in the update instead of update physics, because my thought was like, well, I'll do the physics in the update physics, but the timer, I guess, should go into update because, yeah, it's not physics, it's just a timer. What this resulted in was I would get dashes of different distances, very small differences, but if you just dashed like a straight up over and over and over and over and over again, you could tell sometimes it would be different. And obviously any kind of variance is unacceptable, right? If you can't be consistent, with how the player moves, then the game's not going to feel good. So I did a bit of research and realized, I should put the timer for this in the physics, update physics. And after I did that, I checked the timer, and the timer was consistently always the exact same amount of time. Whereas when I checked the timer and update, when you just put an update, it was different each time by, usually by 0.01 seconds was all the difference, or even less, but that was enough to change how much I would dash. So I feel like this is an area I'm still kind of, I feel like, yeah, I understand it, I think, but I don't feel like I'm master. I don't feel like I fully understand it. I get it. Physics is supposed to happen in update physics, and then you have update for normal logical changes, but I feel like I need to understand that better and research that a little bit more, because I have a bunch of other timers I'm doing an update for just checking for changing states and stuff like that, and other things. And I was like, should those go in physics? And I was like, I don't think so, but let me try putting them over there and just see. And I put them into physics, and it really messed everything up. So, yeah, it's something I still need to get a little bit smarter on. But at the end of the day, I'm finally quote unquote done. I still have cleaning up to do, and I don't think I have any bugs that I know of right now, but the code still needs to be cleaned up a little bit because, the usual, as you're kind of getting stuff working, I take shortcuts, put in some numbers and when I should be using variables and stuff, so that just as I'm testing stuff out. But it's working really well, and it got rid of a lot of bugs actually. That I had a list of bugs from my last player controller, and I had them written down, and I didn't even try to fix them. They were just automatically fixed by transitioning to a finite state machine, because I just cleaned up everything, made it so that I didn't have code that was basically affecting other states, you know, when it should not have been. So it is exciting, and I'm finally glad to be through it because it's the longest I've worked on like one thing. Like before I refactored it, it was kind of hanging over my head. I was kind of doing like one new thing a day, some new like platform or some interactable like lock doors and keys and, you know, stuff like that. And then I went to work on this state machine, and it was like 8 days of work with like nothing to show for it until the final day. And then it was like, even when it was the final, it was, you know, it wasn't working properly, and it was just really demoralizing. But I got through it, and yeah, I'm excited to move on to some other stuff. And that's my update for now. I'll probably do an update. I'm gonna try to do at least one a week. I may do more if, you know, depending on how quick I work, but I'd like to do about minimum, you know, once a week an update. I work on this game, try to work on it every day. I usually work on it anywhere between an hour and 3 hours, depending on the day. So after a week, I should usually have something to show for it. So, yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.